Right, so here's the plan for the talk, just so you know what's coming up. First of all, I'm going to start with why care about science, and this is a new section. This is one that I just put in an hour ago, because after the press conference this morning, we were talking about that, and I mentioned it during it, and I thought this is one of the first things that you have to convey to people in order for them to get why all the rest of this is so important. So why care about science? Whoa, I meant to highlight it, not go forward. And then I want to go on to what is the Eastern European problem at the moment, in all of its dimensions. Then the framework programs, which is the big European-wide mechanism by which we get all this funding to do our international projects. Then I want to come on to the analysis that Professor Martin McKee and myself did of funding in the European Union, the project that we were on, and then the conclusions that came from that, and then the key recommendations that we pulled out from that, and one of those is the salary issue that you might have heard me mention or write about before, if you know anything about me. And then, you want me more here. Understood. And then we will have a coffee break, because that'll be about 40 minutes to an hour for the first section. We'll be needing coffee by then. And then, to entertain you, I actually have a couple of videos of some of my colleagues who are very knowledgeable in this area, and I just went and interviewed them with my iPhone, and I will show those to you so you can get some different perspectives, not just mine, on all the issues around it. Then it's important that you know what the Commission has planned in order to change the situation, and then I want to integrate that all together to say what can be done by people in general, first at the Commission level, but then at the national government levels, then at the research institutions, and then at the levels of individuals and teams and small businesses. And then we can debate, we can discuss, we can disagree, but hopefully we can agree to walk away as friends still at the end of that, if we have particularly harsh disagreements about what needs to be done. So, to kick this off then, why care about science? Well, there's a new appreciation, which is, as Bill Clinton once said, it's the economy, stupid. It really makes such a difference to a country's economy. Now, in the UK, there's lots of advocacy groups trying to push this point, like scienceisvital.org or scienceogram.org, all raising awareness of the fact that once you invest money in science and innovation and research, all the evidence shows that it brings in great return on investment. In terms of all the small businesses it starts up in particular, because that makes up a vital part of the economy. And also it goes beyond just those small businesses and the business environment. Of course, it's about the fabric of society, the education system, and also in particular, if we're talking here about health and life sciences, a modern health system in any country absolutely needs all the scientists around it investigating the efficiencies, digging into the system, find the evidence and feeding it back in order for those systems to do well and to flourish and be more economically viable, more effective, more efficient. So ultimately, if you invest in a decent science system, then we are talking about also the quality of your children's education, job opportunities for you because you've got a more exciting entrepreneurship environment, which then knocks on to your country's economy. And when we're talking about life sciences research in public health and health services research, that also comes down to your personal health, because you want to know that you can go into a local hospital and they are using the right drugs and the right equipment and the right processes and the right systems, like technological systems behind it, in order to make sure that you get the best quality of care. So it comes down to all of those. And there was a report, June 2009, that from the OECD, that's actually saying precisely these kind of points that I actually missed. I know, I'll come on to that in a sec. But the basic point is that you can invest in innovation to get your economy going. And the example that they gave here is that this has been done before. So the governments of Finland and Korea, both, if I'm reading the quote here, both have demonstrated during past downturns that bold innovation policy can start making the kind of changes that get them really back on track. But sometimes it requires a bit of a crisis in order for that to happen. Now, certainly in Eastern Europe, there is something of a crisis with brain drain, and there's a lot of opportunity happening at the same time as people are thinking about how to address that. So, just to put this in general terms, here's some advocacy from the UK. Scienceogram, brilliant site, and it's all about how little we spend on science compared to the size of the problems. And it's got lots of banners like this. Cancer kills nearly a third of us. We spend about £5 per person per year looking for a cure. Now, if you think about how much we spend on kind of like junk food, alcohol, going to the cinema, you realize in general how little we're investing in science. And then you get kind of an idea of, if we were to invest more in science, think about the lives that saves just within the health research. And this is appreciated right across the board. Even the Bank of England have made a statement saying that universities are the perfect foil for markets. So we've invested a lot of faith recently in the financial markets, which then went and crashed on us and needed a lot of bailing out, and that led to austerity measures. But even economists in banking are realizing that if you want a stable economic future, one of the best things you can do is train up talent in science, in research, and then keep it and let that feed back into analysis of all of your systems and let that produce the exciting young companies of tomorrow. Okay, so now what's the problem in Eastern Europe? Well, there is a health gap between East and West. The health systems are weaker in Eastern Europe than they are in Western Europe. There is also, according to a recent report, a growing innovation gap. So you can define innovation in lots of different ways, but the way that the European Commission defined it led them to do a survey in which they found that the gap between East and West is actually growing. And as I'll show you later, when it comes to the central funds of Eastern European science, European science, Eastern European countries are winning a much lower proportion of a really low proportion of those compared to Western countries and associated countries. This is at the same time that there's an increasing reliance on EU grants. There's quite a lot of attitude in some governments that if you have excellent research, why should we fund that? The European Union has funds for that, and they have mechanisms to decide if you're excellent. So they're sort of shrinking their investment and handing over that responsibility to the EU. But as anyone who's worked on an EU grant knows, and we'll come back to this very strongly later, the EU grant pay, if you work on an EU project, is linked to your the pay rates, your local pay rates. So even if you go and work on a big international project, you cannot escape your local pay rates, which I have a problem with, but we'll come back to that later. And finally, not finally, but added to that, thanks to austerity cutting back on all of this, then jobs have been going, and also salaries have been cut. meaning that there are a lot of scientists out there, and I have personal experience of this, basically suffer daily hardship just trying to make ends meet. And then they see they can get better salaries elsewhere, and so there's no surprise that there's a brain drain. There's also some cultural and infrastructure differences between East and West, which need to be addressed for the East to be more competitive. But like I just said, all of these problems, they add up together, and the impact is not trivial, because talking just now about the life sciences, it impacts not just on education and innovation, as we have just said, but also on the national health system, which means your health and well-being, and that health gap right at the top. Now, how much money does the European Union have to spend on science and research across all of the European countries and other associated countries? Well, they have a series of programs called the Framework Programs, which started in 1984. It wasn't called FP1 at the time, but you can back call it that as you were. And the one we are on now is FP7. And the one planned up, coming up next, is not FP8, like it was originally meant to be called. It is a new vision called Horizon 2020. And I'm going to tell you all about that in just a sec. But if you look at the graph at the bottom here, you can see that the investment is increasing. And it's increasing very dramatically as the European Union increasingly believes that this is an important direction forward for the European Union, investing in research and innovation, and also it believes that its programs to date have been pretty successful, as actually they have been, in forging a lot of links between countries and delivering excellent science. So you can really see that that investment level is increasing. Now, the top dotted line was the original plan to have 80 billion, but then it got negotiated down to 71 billion. But you can still see that in terms of investment per annum, we're really shooting up. And this is at a time when in the States, their investment, their public investment in science is actually stagnating, thanks to recent financial and political events. And also in the UK, our Chancellor, Osborne, decided to keep level our science investment. But as you can see in the European Commission, they are really deciding, no, this is the way forward. We want to invest in research and innovation. This is a proper central part of Europe's future direction. So, changes from FP7, for any of you who are working on grants or know people who are working on grants from the European Commission at the moment, will be delighted to hear that lots of administration costs are being cut. There have been pointless timesheets that people have had to fill in to date. They're being chucked out. Apparently all the administrative costs, which just doing basically bureaucracy, are going to be slashed by some 15 to 20%, just to make the whole process easier. There's going to be a smoother reimbursement mechanism, is one part of it. And also, importantly, they're working hard on decreasing their time to grant. And that means the time between you applying for a grant for the European Union and then actually getting that money in. And that has been way too long before, and it's caused people lots of headaches. But now that's cutting back. And another thing that they want to do, moving from FP7 to Horizon 2020, is including a lot of small businesses and startups. And they want to do that because they want to start turning all of this excellent science that goes on across Europe into marketable products, into working solutions in whatever systems they're addressing. So they really want to try and get results from that and link it into the economy. And so they've really had this focus on this applied solutions, output, returned on investment. They're thinking about science in a very businessy way. And of course, they're trying to expand their whole program, which means building up the infrastructure. And they've actually now learnt branding and vision and big talk in the very American way. But it's actually not a bad thing to say, this is Horizon 2020. It is built on our 3 pillars of excellent science, industrial leadership, and addressing societal challenges. And so let me just break this down, what these official 3 pillars are. The excellent science is all about maintaining the basic science. So some universities were getting concerned when the plans were that we were going to, see this from a business perspective and start getting return on investment out of our science. They were worried that it was going to go all to the applied science end, but it's not. It's going to be evenly balanced between that basic science that Europe has been doing very well, including Marie Curie grants for mobility, but at the same time, we really want to think about how that links with industry, particularly with small businesses, and then also we want to put a focus on the science we're doing in order to tackle the big issues for Europe. And this is part of the branding, that we're doing now science for solving problems of health, so we will have better health, our food supply, energy, cleaner transport, climate issues and environment, and also more inclusive societies. So you're thinking about socially disadvantaged people. And so this is the sort of package that they're looking at. And that's even been sort of like budgeted down into a total of 100%. And so that was initially 80 billion, but now it's 71 billion, broken down according to those streams. So that's what's coming up, and that's the vision behind it, okay? I thought that was important background to have before we then go and talk about Eastern Europe's place in that, and problems and what can be done, just so that you know what's coming up, so you've got an idea of what to get involved in and what needs to be tackled. Yeah, and this is just to say, here is, this is all in pounds because I took this from another talk. Here's the Horizon 2020 budget. If a fifth of that is spent on health, which is our area of interest, here's how that compares to the UK's National Institute of Health Research budget, our Medical Research Council, the Wellcome Trust, our biggest charity, or another estimate of total UK health expenditure. So you can see it's not insubstantial. The Americans invest hugely in this area, which is somewhat ironic given that they've got such a broken healthcare system. Their actual health research science is brilliant, but they're not feeding a lot of things in the right way, but that's another point. So what we did, and I want to introduce the project and the work that we did, just so you get a background of how I came into all of this, into analyzing what the European Union has been funding in health-related research, and then the conclusions that come from that. Oh, by the way, if anyone's got any questions at any point, you can just throw them in. So don't feel as though this is like overly formal. If there's something that you don't understand on a slide, or just have a query and think you're going to forget it, feel free to put up your hand or just shout out and heckle me. It's all fine. But anyway, this was our project. It was called Health Research for Europe. And the idea was, when it was originally funded, was that we would be discovering the very best health-related work that the European Union had funded, and we would be telling about what it had achieved and all this kind of stuff. And so we said, okay, yep, that sounds like a good project. Give us the database of all the projects that you've got. And then they said, no. We said, why not? And they said, well, it's private information about the researchers. And we said, you've got to be kidding. This is not a data privacy issue. This is public funding money. We had to almost threaten to sue them in order to get this information, but we got it. And that was 27,000 projects of all the research that they had funded under FP5 and FP6, so we're talking 1998 to 2006, I think. I hope I've got that right, but that bracket. And we started out trying to screen it for the very top projects, but we found lots of problems with their databases. And this started us on our path to, critiquing how they operate in terms of their information management. But anyway, so we sort of had a bit of a change of heart, and we decided we can't get enough information from this database about who's done the excellent leading projects because we don't have any outputs associated with this. And then the contact information in this database about the researchers, well, that was pretty inadequate as well. I mean, a lot of the time the information was missing. When there was information there and we tried to call them up or email them, that information was obsolete. And then when we did get through to project leaders who had run projects, their response rate in terms of helping us out was pretty poor. So after a while we said, okay, change of plan, we're going to drop this. We've got a database of 27,000 projects. We've got all of the finances associated with this. And also we've been going through all these projects, meticulously categorizing them. Let's just do an economic analysis on what has been funded. So then we did a big breakdown of what the European Union funds in terms of health-related research. Okay. So out of all of the 27,000 projects funded to about 30 billion euros, about 1/5 of that was health-related research. So this much is health-related, and we went through these 27,000 projects manually. We had a team of about 10 people with PhDs just screening through all of these. So big amount of work. And then all of these weren't. Now, out of the health-related projects, essentially, we had 2,278 that we could classify according to those initial health categories that the European Union wanted us to talk about. And then there was another chunk, which was basically very basic science and very biotech science, which wasn't targeted at any particular disease. It was just general understandings within proteomics and genomics and this kind of stuff. And then there were some conferences, and we decided to cut those out because we wanted to look at research that produced outputs. So from these ones that were classifiable, you know, with a direct target on health or health systems, we then broke that down into the 47 categories that we had, and unsurprisingly, the largest was cancer, and then other non-communicable diseases means other apart from mental health and cardiovascular. And food safety was really high in there because during this time there had been lots of issues with CJD, prion disease, and food scares. So we even then went and broke down some of those sections a little bit further. So mental health then broken down into Alzheimer's disease, which gets a huge amount of funding, much more than depression, even though the burden of disease of depression is much higher, and so on down. So that was our categorization in terms of subject areas with all of these projects. Then, as I was saying, we wanted to look at the outputs. But the end of project reports that people send in, they hadn't linked electronically in any way to all of these projects. They'd just sort of filed them up and not done anything with them. So that was a dead route. I had this idea because I'd worked in informatics that we could take the project IDs and put them into PubMed, into the grants field, and automatically see if anything was generated from that. That is a dead route because the grant field in PubMed recognizes American grant codes and also a few other grant-giving agencies which have made deals with PubMed to do that. The European Commission hasn't. So its grant codes are dead in PubMed. And so this is one of the things that they've taken on board as a recommendation. And so then, like I said before, we tried that route of going to the principal investigators on these projects and saying, hey, what have you done? What are the outputs? What have you learned? What productivity have you had from your health-related research? And as I told you before, one, getting the contacts was so difficult, and then when you followed them up, there was such low response that we thought, this is hardly an authoritative analysis. So then, someone that I worked with had this great idea of, well, if you can't put the grant codes into PubMed, why don't you put them into Google Scholar? Because Google Scholar scans the whole article that's been deposited, so it will cover the acknowledgement sections. So we tried some of those codes, and they worked. So we put them into Google Scholar, and from that, we got and by an automated process. So we did a program that just ran them through. And Google Scholar actually stopped us from doing this because of their contracts. They didn't like us doing this. So they didn't like automated programs running on their database. So we changed the program a bit to look a bit more like one very hard-working person going at it more slowly. And we got our information. So we actually got all the papers produced from all of these projects of interest and the citations associated with them. And then, worried that people wouldn't trust Google Scholar, I had this idea that why don't we actually take those titles that we harvest from Google Scholar and feed those titles into PubMed? And that worked too. So then, feeding those titles into PubMed, we could see what proportion of those outputs came up in PubMed as well. And it's about 70%, which is what you'd expect. And so that was a big paper that came out. And this was actually in The Lancet, the outputs of health-related research. And what we actually found is that 50% of projects had no representation in Google Scholar, and 56 had none in PubMed. So it was a case of wake up, there are lots of projects being funded that aren't putting anything out there associated with their grant codes. But one point that I'd like to make, because it did get some pushback from the Commission, one point I'd like to make is it really depends on project size. So you can see with lots and lots of little projects that are sort of like personally funded grants, they're quite unlikely to publish anything. But as soon as you get into the 240,000 to 1 million project range, then that level really jumped sharply to about 80%. And one thing that you can't see here, what causes this jump, I've actually got from another paper, and I've worked out that at this kind of like 240K barrier, what happens is this is when the international projects start being funded. And so when you've actually got international teams, they're more likely to publish, and international papers from papers that are published by international teams also have better citation statistics as well. So international projects are very more prestigious and more important, and so the European Union is actually doing a very good job at making sure that linking happens, because there's lots of evidence that this is a productive way to go. So we also looked at countries. So here is the country population, and here is the number of projects that, number of health research projects that the countries participated in. And I've just sort of put in a regression line there. And you can see Italy, France, and Germany, they're sort of like all on the same sort of rate for big countries. United Kingdom in health research does brilliantly. And in fact, we lead some 20% of all the health-related projects funded. So I wrote an article recently of why the UK should stay in the European Union, and one of the major reasons is because we do so well from the science. We really do get a lot of funding from the central pot, and also being a large country can do a lot of the leading of where that science direction goes. And like I said, with all the international projects, because international papers are so valued and large-scale projects are so valued, we would actually be crazy to pull out of the European Union because of what it would do for our capacity to lead this win-win situation that we've got at the moment. But let's go down to the lower end where the smaller countries are, and that's zooming into the lower end. And you can see that per population, some of the Eastern European countries, Poland, Romania, Portugal now isn't doing so well, but Bulgaria, they've got worse sort of rates, shall we say, than the Netherlands, that's doing brilliantly, as is Denmark and Switzerland and Sweden and all those nice little clean countries up in the northwest that do ever so well. But there's something else that you should look at, which is, okay, they might not get a lot for their population, but what about for their researcher base, for all the researchers that they've got, involved? in the country. And so then we've plotted that out too, and the size of the bubble is kind of like the size of the country. Black countries are the newest 12 members. Grey is the original 15, and white, even though they're all small, are the associated countries that contribute funds in order to participate. And they all do brilliantly, the associated countries, but the actual full members that are the newest members are sort of lagging down here with lower amounts of their population being involved in research. But as you can see, by just looking up along these kind of lines, even if you've got an overall researcher base of, what's this, around 3,000 researchers per million inhabitants, a small country like Estonia can actually do really well. It's not far off in terms of proportion of researchers per population is France and Germany, but in terms of winning EU grants, you know, it looks to be doing really well. So maybe it's relying on EU grants a lot more than national grants. And then, even though the participation is low, I went and did some research about, you know, what else has been written about this. And even though the participation is low, this table from the European Commission's own impact assessment document is what really shocked me, because at 6% participation of all of these 12 countries under FP7 Health, the funding was 2.5%. So to put that 2.5% in context, it is 1/34th of what the EU 15 got during the same time. So they got 34 times more funding, but they're only about 4 times bigger population-wise, and their GDP is only about 12 times bigger, and their contribution to the EU budget is only about 13 times bigger, something in that kind of region. So that really is drastic underfunding. And I started looking at the ratio between participation and actual funding, thinking, why is that? And I don't know what my next slide is, so let's have a look. Aha, yeah. And I thought, well, when I was doing this, I was actually in Slovenia, so let me tell you about that. And I was working on this project in Slovenia, and I was aware that my funding rate was rock bottom. And I was finding it hard to survive on the salary that I was getting from that. Whereas, if I were to be doing exactly the same work on the same project from London, I knew that I'd get triple take-home pay in terms of net salary. And in fact, we then went and put in another project application, which was Slovenia and a few other countries in London. And like it always goes in terms of these project applications, we all decided what roles we'd play. We all divided up the hours and the person months, and then we had to form the budget. So then everyone had to declare what their local salary rate was, and all of the hours that had been evenly distributed then became money which was very unevenly distributed, because you're forced to claim a local rate, and the big money goes to the Western European institutions. So I called up the London one that we were partnering with on this, and I said, can I do this work from your place, because I can't survive on this local salary? And they had a look into it, and they said no, there wasn't enough because they had to cover someone else, and then the project application sort of fell through anyway. But that's what started me thinking, this is absolutely bizarre. I have to, one, get out of here, which was Slovenia at the time, and go back to a London salary. And secondly, I have to say something about this ridiculous situation. So we were invited after that Lancet paper to actually make recommendations about what the European Union should be doing in terms of its new funding program. We were invited to be provocative, and that was the piece to which Loijo referred to earlier, and Peter contacted me about. And we said, okay, if the European Union really wants to ramp up its science and innovation funding, here are 4 things that they need to do. One is cutting bureaucracy, but we're seeing that they're already doing a lot of that. There's one aspect that they're missing, which is the tendering system. I won't go into that now, but basically it wastes a lot of people's time. Secondly, research mapping. We hand categorized all of these projects, and only then can you actually start seeing what's being invested in and start trying to cross-map that with what national funders are doing. You need to have that kind of system built in and those kind of collaborations around Europe in order to see what are the gaps and the overlaps in terms of funding systems and get efficiency thereby. Another thing was open data. Following this finding that they were publishing, that so few of these projects were publishing papers, we said, well, there should at least be a policy that for those research projects that gather data, they at least hand in that data, and that data can be available for other people to use. And the European Commission has done a lot on open access, but they tend to bundle open data into open access, which in my view is a big mistake, because open access is all about being able to get to the papers that are already published and who's paying for them. Open data is really a revolution in terms of how we do science. It's not just gathering data, analyzing it myself, then telling you what I think. It's gathering data, cleaning it, putting it on the table, and then saying what I think, and you can all come and check it, and you can all link it to other bits of data and do other investigations. There's going to be a whole revolution in science, which involves a lot of this secondary science and reanalysis, and the European Commission are just not as on it as they should be. And then finally, this point about Eastern Europe and the participation rate. I went through document after document trying to find what they were saying about that, and I found in lots of their own documents evidence that the situation was pretty bad. The partition rates were low, the networking rates were low, but absolutely no business plan as to how they want to go and address it. And certainly nothing about the salaries. So what did they say in all this documentation about the salaries? Well, in the actual impact assessment itself, where I showed you that table with that 2.5 financing rate, this is a massive document they had. What was their commentary on it? Absolutely minimal. And I thought, this is shocking. You know, you're trying to sell this new program and address all the concerns and shape it up in order to be better, and you've got something like this and you've got no plan to tackle it. And so in all of the Horizon 2020 documents, it was just neglected. Now, there was a paper commissioned by the German government that actually did start looking at Central and Eastern Europe and their participation in life sciences, and then it looked at the funding as well, and it said, well, it's known that the salary rates and the cost of living are lower in Eastern Europe. Therefore, let's not look at that. Let's just look at that participation rate, because that's a better indicator. So classic top-down analysis with no understanding of the bottom-up, the issues on the level of the individual scientist. And also, there was a researcher's report that was meant to be an analysis on, you know, what are the motivations on the level of the individual researcher. And again, they had nothing on it apart from one statement saying that there was a correlation between living costs and salaries, and just left it at that. So I don't think this was a particularly good statistician who said there was a correlation, because there's a correlation and there's a correlation, right? I mean, there is actually a correlation in society as a whole between height and intelligence. But we don't say, you're 6'4", you get the job, you must be bright. You're 5'2", no way. Because we understand that that correlation is kind of like small and trivial, and if you want to understand intelligence, you look at someone's track record or their eloquence or how well they do tasks. But a correlation of 1 means it's absolutely determined. But this is a very lazy statement to say, oh, it correlates with living costs, and so therefore it's all fine. Whereas and I'll just say this, in fact, even a position paper by the EU12 grumbled a little bit about salaries, but then said, we wish the Commission would take into account value for money. I wish they would too, but it's not going to work that way when they're just going to be assessing projects in terms of excellence. They're not going to go and do the calculations about, who's spending what hours and things like that. They just want to see that a problem can be solved in an excellent way. So I think that there's a different way to solve this. Now, and that's why I was delighted when I came across this Commission report from 2006 and 2007 that actually looked at the researcher salaries right across Europe and found massive differences. It then regressed out all of the living costs and still found massive differences to exist. So anyone who says that the recompensation is fair because it's living cost differences, you can just point them to this and say the Commission's own report proves that that's not the case. So they know this full well, that they're paying salaries in some countries that you can't live on, and they're paying salaries in other countries to do the same work that you can live very well on. And so we will wind up for the first half in just a sec. Oh yeah, now that statement just bothers me so much as a statistician that I gave it its own slide, but I've already said what I think about that, so we'll move on. What did come out of that report was a really interesting analysis of publication rates, but we'll skip over that. And that was the evidence from that report. And so this is why we have just said, look, there's a very simple principle, which is equal pay for equal work. And we've said this in that original paper. I said it again in another paper. I did a fuller analysis. There was a House of Lords investigation into innovation in the European Union. I made contributions to that, and I made sure I got that point in there. An article that came out yesterday in a popular online forum, I wrote about this, and then I've given various interviews to blogs and news outlets, and just anyone will listen on the issue. Because what I've been told is that you can't give them equal pay, because if you have some people employed within an institution on an EU project and they're getting good money, and then other people employed nationally, that will cause stress and tension and differences. Well, when I was working in Slovenia, I didn't think, I wouldn't have thought, oh look, someone is on an EU project and I'm not, and they're getting good money and I'm not. Therefore, I'm going to beat them up, give up science? No, I would obviously be more encouraged to either force my government to pay me more or try and apply for an EU project, or both at the same time. It's a clear stimulus as to what to do. So that bizarre argument doesn't stand. I won't say who that came from, but it's actually not anyone in the Commission. It's just a random comment. And I've been told by some other people, no, the Commission doesn't hire scientists. That's not how it works. It's the research institutions that they recompense for the work done. Well then, why can't research institutions claim more pay for their researchers to do excellent research at a European level when it needs to be of that level? But actually, ultimately, I think hiring scientists is precisely what they do. I mean, they've got this new mission statement that they want this unified labor market for scientists, and everything should be competitive and fair. And so how is it fair that if they're prepared to fund some excellent research and they're prepared to give a Danish salary for it, but if you, from Slovakia, can do the same excellent research, and no one Danish can, then they'll say, oh yes, we'll fund that, but we'll just give you like 3 times less. Why? Because we're going to punish you according to what your local government pays you to do a local project. It doesn't make sense. You should be able to competitively claim for what you can deliver. And that's basically what I've been saying. Services. Yeah, so essentially I can understand why they originally started paying this way. You know, when it starts out as a small program, you don't want to set up a whole system of determining what salaries are going to be in different countries. You say, you know, that's your job. We'll just pay the research institutions back. But now that the program has grown so big, and there are so many people dependent on it, and they've got this new vision of this open researcher labor market, and also you can see that if you just double down on local salaries, that you're going to get brain drain. Once you have all this evidence to hand, now is the time to start making a change based on that. So what I want to do now is, that's me done for the first half. I'm now going to sit down and relax, and we're just going to have 15 minutes of me talking to Professor Martin McKee, and then we'll have a coffee break. But essentially Martin, who's my co-author, is one of the most knowledgeable people around. He's published hundreds of papers. Last year he published over 100. And he is a professor of public health in Europe. And he's constantly traveling, and he knows so many people and so many things that I just had to interview him for this and get his take on it. So, other Martin, take it away. I'll take off this headset, and then when that's done, no, I'll keep it on. And then when that's done, we can all go and get coffee and discuss a bit, and then we'll come back in the second half to look at what the European Commission is actually planning. Hi, Martin. Well, thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts on all of these issues. I've got a range of questions here that touch on a whole variety of issues around Eastern European health and science capacity. Can you all hear that okay? But first of all, could you just for us give us a sort of holistic picture of health, hospitals, public health policy and research capacity surrounding health in Eastern Europe? Where is Eastern Europe now, and what does it need to do in general?
Well, we can look back to the 1980s at a time when health was stagnating, life expectancy was stagnating in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. In fact, that conceals the fact that it was getting worse for adult health.
Can it go louder?
And it was compensated a bit by improvements in child health. Now, since then, there have been marked improvements right across Central and Eastern Europe, but there's still a large gap in life expectancy with the West. All the countries began to improve in the early 1990s, but they still have quite a long way to go to close the gap with Western Europe.
Right.
We also have had significant problems with healthcare. Clearly, there have been great improvements in the management of chronic diseases in particular. Life expectancy at older ages has improved greatly, but again, there's still a long way to go. In some countries, there have been significant problems in retaining the health workforce as younger people have moved to Western Europe because of free movement within the European Union, and the fact that the Western European countries have not been training enough to satisfy their own markets.
Yeah, and what about the research workforce surrounding that core health workforce that's associated also with basic science and innovation and ability to monitor and analyse the whole health systems?
Some time ago we looked at the health research output across the world, and we found that there were some parts of the world that were particularly depleted in terms of their capacity. Post-conflict societies, West Africa, small island states, and the countries of the former Soviet Union.
Right.
The situation in Central and Eastern Europe is not as bad, but of course within all of Europe there's variations. In health research, some countries have always done very well, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Scandinavia, and others, including Germany, Austria, have done less well. But the countries of Central and Eastern Europe tend to be down at the lower end of the distribution in terms of output.
Right, okay, so we've got a weaker health systems in generally and weaker research capacity around it. Now, the students coming through education system and universities, would you say the education system is strong enough to make a good sort of researcher base at the lowest levels in these countries? Does the education system need to be significantly strengthened up, or does the problem come with people leaving when the job opportunities in those domains encourage that drift?
Well, there's a great deal of variation in the quality of higher education in all countries. My own country, you go from Oxford, Cambridge, London at the top right down to some other places that really have quite a long way to go. And similarly within Central and Eastern Europe, there are some universities that have produced world-class research, but others where, again, there are gaps. But I'm not sure that the education is really the problem. I think the issue is retention.
Right.
And it's the ability to keep people after they have graduated, even if they go abroad for a while, to enhance their skills, then to bring them back again. And in general, countries have failed to invest in good career pathways. Very few countries have systems of doctoral, postdoctoral training that is fully funded and that will provide people with a living wage that will allow them to progress up the system.
Yeah, and to attract foreign researchers in as well, to give it that international mix of ideas that you see so much here in London. So when Eastern European institutions work on projects internationally in collaboration with institutions from London and Denmark and France and so forth and so on, are there any notable cultural differences in terms of how they operate, how they think?
No, I don't think so. I think if we were to look to the countries of the former Soviet Union, and I'm excluding the Baltic states here, but if we look at the Central Asian republics, yes, definitely there are cultural issues there because the legacy of Soviet science. But within the countries that are in the European Union, not at all. The researchers there have been integrated into Western European research projects for many years. I think the main difference is that they do tend to have higher teaching loads and higher administrative loads than perhaps in the West, and that makes it rather more difficult. Also, I think that there is a concern that perhaps research accomplishments are less well valued in terms of promotion and tenure as they are in Western European universities. I think a third problem is the ability for career progression, where you do tend to have a promotion sometimes seeming to be on the basis of age rather than achievement, and I'm not sure that young, enthusiastic, talented individuals are always recognised quite as well as they might be.
Right. And so with this in mind, the fact that you do have, and I would say especially in the younger EU savvy generations rising up through the ranks, competent people in these countries looking to take part in international projects, how should they go about making sure that they can actually win more projects and get involved with more international projects?
Well, international projects are by their very nature collaborative, and I think it simply means reaching out to other people who are working in the same area, developing trusted long-term relationships. Many of these already exist, and in fact we do see quite good representation by some centres within Central and Eastern Europe, although clearly overall it is less than you would like it to be.
Right. So there should be a drive to get that better representation in general, just to increase the networking between the East and West. Do you think in Western Europe there's any resistance or prejudice to Eastern European
I've never seen any. I think the issue that we're moving towards is the concern that perhaps the governments in these countries are failing to invest adequately in their own capacity. Clearly they can draw on international funds, but you do need to have the base there, the career progression, the infrastructure in place. And unfortunately, when you compare what's available in Western European countries like the Medical Research Council, the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, INSERM and others in France and elsewhere, then there is a real lack of investment from national resources in making sure that there is a research base, and also the infrastructure that goes with that, the investment in databases, the investment in research capacity within healthcare facilities, and so on. That really should be a priority. But that is a priority for the national governments, although of course they can look for structural funding to help them to do that. Unfortunately, so far, few have done that, but that's partly because they have not themselves placed a priority on enhancing their research infrastructure.
Right. So to conclude, what we've basically, what you've basically said so far, and that is there is absolutely the raw capacity in terms of talent coming through the schools. There is also no resistance in terms of the rest of Europe in integrating in teams between East and West in order to have excellent research projects. The problem comes at the national levels, where research output is not as valued as highly as maybe administrative tasks or teaching and so forth and so on, thereby restricting the researchers in terms of the capacity to have output.
That's a pretty good summary.
How much do you think salary comes into all of this?
There's clearly an issue with salaries because, of course, we know from our own experience many people who have been trained abroad, have gone back to their own countries, tried to make a career in research. They're often blocked in terms of promotion, but also the salaries that they can obtain are so much less than in the private sector. I think across Europe we have this unfortunate ideological position that in general public service, government service is bad and private employment is good, and it does make it very difficult to retain the top quality people we need in the public sector, in the universities. Instead, you get people who are grossly overqualified going off to sell pharmaceuticals and things like that, when clearly that's a waste of money all around.
Yeah. In terms of people being blocked for promotion, or do you believe that maybe there is a risk, especially at this moment in time, that if a lot of talent does go abroad and looks back to the colleagues who are in power and sees them to be, let us say, of a lesser level of competence than what they see in other international teams, then you could get a structure that is very difficult to overturn at later dates?
I think that's true. I think all countries, at whatever level of development, should be working at developing and retaining the highest quality people to be the research leaders of the future. And if those high quality people see that their prospects are much better in another country, then that will simply postpone for a generation the changes that are needed.
Yes. So tell us a little bit more about these structural funds, because the structural funds are quite massive compared to what actually comes through in the standard science funding from the Commission. Now, we both know that not a lot of those structural funds have been used in research, let alone health research, even though this is an area that the Commission is very keen on for all of the obvious reasons. Why do you think that is not being picked up? Why isn't that happening?
First of all, there's the diffusion of responsibility. To bid for structural funds, you need to get agreement across government, and often in that process, the health ministries and the science ministries are relatively weak. In addition, they have many of their own immediate priorities to deal with. Running a health ministry is a little bit like firefighting, and also you have very limited continuity. I was speaking to a minister in one of the Baltic states recently who noted that he was the 17th minister that the country has had since independence. So there is a real challenge with continuity and capacity that is needed to make the case and then to take it across government, to build the coalitions, to build the alliances, and to point out that for economic development should be a key priority. But we need stronger ministries to be able to do that.
Now, given that the ministries are, as you've told me before, overstretched and running around putting out fires, what can the cool and level-headed European Commission do in order to help them out, enhance everyone's lot, raise awareness? What can the Commission do centrally that would help the situation?
To some extent, the Commission has already been working on this. I'm aware that individuals from DG Sanko, the Directorate General for Health, have been talking to ministries of health in the countries that have been most affected by the financial crisis to encourage them to apply for structural funds for healthcare. But ultimately, it really is a matter for the national governments. The funds are there to be bid for, and if they're not, the Commission cannot tell them to do that. It can simply make them aware that they exist, that there are opportunities. It already does that, although I'm sure that it could do it more.
Okay. Is there anything that individual scientists in Eastern Europe can do? Passionate individuals or research organisations, how can they increase their ability to get money in, or to pressure the government in order to open necessary channels of money or cooperation?
Well, they should be acting as advocates within their own countries. They should be providing support to their governments as they bid for structural funds. One of the things that has concerned me in a number of countries I work in is that you often see fragmentation with people pursuing their own individual agendas. I think there's a strong argument for the health community, the academic community, to get together behind the ministries of health and social affairs and science, recognising that the real battles that need to be fought are within the cabinet. To try to get the ministries to be the ministries of health and science to support this, you're pushing at an open door. They recognise that too, but they do need the support to make it a reality.
So a brief summary of the main barriers to progress at the moment would be?
The main barrier to progress is that many ministries do not have the capacity to put together a competitive proposal to obtain the structural funding they need to get the infrastructure in place. I think it's a vicious cycle, because if they could do that once, they could put in place the capacity that would allow them to bid for it for more and more funds in the future.
Right.
But you need to take that first step.
Yeah. So then you're into then the good habit of bringing that money through to start building things up.
Exactly.
Martin, thanks very much. That's been fantastic.
Right, thank you very much indeed.
So that's pretty much it for the first half. The first half being a lot longer than the second half. So that was about an hour. We'll have about 15 minutes of coffee now to just, perk back up and have some chats. And then in the second half, I want to tell you about what the Commission has actually got planned. Because if you get on the phone and talk to people, you'll find that now it's starting to get through and there are things emerging, and it's maybe not as bleak as Martin might have been sounding at the end of that interview. So let's go and grab some coffee, and then after that, I'll have about another 30 minutes more of updating you with the newest news and talk about opportunities, because I think there are a lot coming along. Thanks. Okay, survivors, welcome back to part 2. I've taken my jacket off, had a coffee, feeling more relaxed. So like I said before, this one's going to be shorter, and it's after a little interview with Matitz here. I'm going to talk about what's actually being planned and what are the positive, really the opportunities that now exist for moving forward. But first of all, let's do this interview with Matitz. This isn't me being lazy, throwing a chunk of my talk onto other people, but really they're just people that I really think you should hear from. Matitz Meglic is MD, PhD, MBA, all at age 33, also father of 2 children and an avid mountain bike. He's a very energetic guy, very bright guy, and in Slovenia he's been leading up some top projects. And he was actually in London recently when I knew I was going to do this talk. So I said, would you mind if we went off for a drink, and I got out my iPhone again and just got your thinking of some of this, so that people can see, a different angle of thought on all of these questions. So Martin, let's roll with part 1, and then I'll explain later why there are 2 parts. It's about 7 minutes, just so you warning. Okay, here we go. Matisse, thanks for taking time to go through this, especially after your lecture. So we're having a beer here and been discussing issues. But first question, your experience as a project coordinator on international projects around Europe, what differences do you see between your situation and the situation of other similar people in coordinator positions in Eastern Europe and those in Western Europe? What's the main differences?
Well, in terms of competencies, I couldn't say there are any huge differences.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's areas in which we are weaker, but at those at which we are strong, we can easily compete with the rest of Europe, at least.
Yeah.
I think we can do our job as good as anyone else in Europe.
Yeah.
That would be, pretty much.
So first up, there's no difference in people competence. Do you think that you have different burdens in terms of teaching burdens? Do you have more teaching burdens? Do you have more administrative burdens? Do you have less resources to play with as a project coordinator?
Well, I think the resources are the key, particularly in the current times of austerity. What we see is that we don't have problems acquiring new projects. We don't have problems acquiring new budgets to do research. We do have problems acquiring talent, and we do have problems sometimes, purely red tape problem in getting those people on board. Sometimes we're just not allowed to employ new people, even though we've got the budgets.
Right. Okay, so we'll come on to that a bit, but first let's talk about people. Do you think that there is a real brain drain from east to west, especially facilitated by international projects and Marie Curie and other kinds of support? Does this actually help suck people westwards?
Well, I think in my opinion there's a clear distinction in terms of the brain drain. You've got let's say the 90% of people who are pretty much happy to be where they are, and you've got the 10% of people which you actually want to have on board and you want them to be engaged in the key aspects of your project. And those 10% are the one that do actually go abroad because they get better offers eventually.
The 10% that are really in demand.
So that does present an issue for us because usually you spend some time building someone up, and then obviously after 2-3 years they leave for a better opportunity.
So it's not just that they're brighter, that they've actually started to become integrated in a team, but then the team keeps falling apart because your leading figures in it get the better offers, and you don't have enough resources to retain them.
And you even can't blame them.
Sure.
When they come to you and say, I've got a better offer, I'm leaving. You say, well, good for you. You should go and really go for it. Right?
And so do you think those decisions mainly come down to salary, opportunity in terms of career progression, or just ability to work in a more exciting place with better infrastructure and less bureaucratic shackles? What's the kind of major factors in the mix for those people?
I would say salary is the first one. It might follow, opportunities might follow, but that depends a bit on where you work. I've seen teams, in Eastern Europe, which can provide so, high quality projects, enough funding, a lot of funding to do basically whatever your heart wishes to do. So it was not the opportunities, it was just the salary limitation. There are of course cases in which the infrastructure is not strong enough, the overall quality of the project attracted is not good enough. So yes, there's other stuff as well, but the salaries are definitely the prime issue.
Okay, and to really come down to it in salaries, is it because people have decent salaries and want to get better salaries, or is it because they're having a hard lifestyle on their current
salary and just want some breathing space?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's, we've got all these people who we've told them, we said study so that you'll be, that you'll have a normal life, you'll do work that really satisfies you, not that you're gonna grow really rich, but have a decent life. So we're selling this story, and in the end, when they start working, we're not providing it back to them.
Yes.
Not even decent conditions for life. So I think it's not about wanting to earn tremendous amounts of money. It's just wishing to have a decent life.
Right. Okay. Now on to the other part of the point, which was the infrastructure and the capacity within the research institutes in Eastern Europe. You, as a coordinator of projects, comparing what you have to hand with that which you see your colleagues have in Western Europe, what do you see are the main differences in?
Well, when it comes to infrastructure, in my particular field, infrastructure is not a crucial limiting factor.
Right.
So we are not facing that. We're not facing huge capital investments in projects. So for us, that's not a limiting factor, and that's also the reason why we're able to grow quite successfully in a relatively short time because of the lack of the capital, the need of the capital investment. It still boils down to the resources, the human resources, I think, are for us a key issue. Because projects do provide additional funding for the relatively slow amount of the capital investments that we require for our own projects. So we're quite happy with that. But the human resources remain the key issue.
Right. So it's the cultural structure around you. It's the meetings, the ability to get out and network, and this kind of thing that makes a difference on that level for you.
Yeah. I mean, we're not. When I look at the projects which we are coordinating. We don't experience problems in terms of infrastructure. They don't possess they don't create a limiting factor.
But what about the culture and the hierarchy of an organization? Do you feel that is well structured for a research institute? I'm not talking about your own in particular. I'm talking about when you look east to west comparisons, because I've heard other people say that some Eastern institutions are not built organizationally in terms of the people for research competitiveness.
Yeah, I mean, again, not speaking about my own institution, which I think is quite prone towards supporting research the way it can. I could agree. I could say that there's probably I don't know if you could call that red tape or administration or the culture of professors trying to hold on to their positions, not letting younger, really motivated and capable researchers to try to acquire new projects. This is something we've been facing in a university setting. So we would have this wonderful idea backed up by previous research, and there was no way of getting research funding because we were not old enough, we were not distinguished in terms of being formally distinguished by the Slovene research community. We were recognized outside of Slovenia, but for Slovenia we could not get funding. That was really frustrating.
Interesting distinction.
Because it cut out because I ran out of space on my iPhone. So then I went and deleted a file and filmed part 2. But I think actually I'm going to skip part 2 because you get an idea already of the flavour of what people are saying. So I think we should, just crack on with some of the other points. Clearly what Martin and Matisse were coming down to together was similarly to what I had said, that salaries issue is very, very important for people and, their quality of life, but also an environment around them where young people can get to participate in good programs and then go up a clear career pathway and a ladder without being blocked or stifled by too much politics or bureaucracy. These are the important factors that sort of keep coming up. And I mean, we all believe, because I've been, talking with these guys and many other guys, that in terms of the potential of the people in Eastern Europe coming through the system, it's all there. It's just when they get their qualifications, what's next for them is the important step. Their salaries and their career opportunities. Once the country has invested so much in their training, it's at that stage which is the key bottleneck that we need to be kind of like looking at. Oh, and by the way, I will be around at the end of this second half as well, for chatting and catching up with everyone. I've got loads of time to chat to everyone. A couple of people were worried in the break there that was the only time to get me. No, I'll be here at the end, and also everyone here is more than welcome to email me or call me up and discuss these issues, because one of the most important things is sharing of ideas and networking, because then that's how you actually find out about opportunities coming along. So, bye-bye, Matisse, thank you for that contribution, and let's see what the Commission has to say. Now, one of the things that I complained about before was that the fact that you can see tons of popular articles, whether it comes from Greece, or whether it comes from Latvia, or whether it comes from Hungary, or any of these countries. You can find articles on crisis in science, on brain drain, on underinvestment. But when you look at the European Commission's documentation, like I said before, it seems to gloss over a lot of the numbers. Now, they've got big plans for addressing the fact that there wasn't enough industry participation in FP7. We should have more small enterprises involved. And there's a lot of attention being addressed to, gender equality in science and getting more women involved in science, but then also going up through the positions, the career ladder. And these are all good and important, and you would hope that this would be complemented by something dealing with the poorer region, shall we say, or the Eastern European bloc, or just inequalities geographically. But this was surprisingly missing, and it was very frustrating. And whenever it was mentioned, I found it to be in all these documentations in pretty patronizing language, talking about laggard countries and laggard regions, and we won't compromise excellence to help them out and stuff like that. And I was thinking, well, if you actually knew some of the young scientists coming through, then maybe you wouldn't talk about it in the same terminology. You would be talking about, the potential of what's there. If you can see you've got the right people, and if you think you know how to organize research institutions, just put the two together and talk about the potential. I'll come on to that later, but the Commission does have some solutions. You cannot easily find this in their documentation. You can find it in bits and pieces in some side documentation, partly because they're still working on this. But if you call up the right people in the Commission and connect the dots, it doesn't fall on any one person particularly, but if you put it all together, this is a summary of their sort of emerging plans. First of all, you heard Martin talk before about the structural funds. Now, under the same time frame as FP7, there was some 348 billion euros, I believe, about a third of the whole EU budget, that was put aside for, in terms of structural funds, right across Europe, not just regions, but right across Europe, so that there could be various important developmental programs to stimulate things in the right area. What you found is that the Commission was keen to see a lot of this invested in research and innovation programs, and it pretty much wasn't done anywhere. And Mark McCarthy was talking to me about his FIRE study, which looked at whether structural funds had been utilized for health-related research, and pretty much found that the ministries across Europe were fairly clueless about that there was money available, and they were also pretty clueless about the related scientific research in their own countries. So there's a middle layer represented by the ministries of health that really aren't getting the Commission's plans, and they're not getting the researcher base that they need to be interacting and passing information between the two like they should. However, so a lot of that money actually went unspent because people in government felt that they didn't have the time to, go and make all these complicated applications which they didn't understand, so they just left it. Or when people did apply, then often it went on construction. Airports and roads was the classic one. So, but I am told that this time round, with the structural funds, a lot of the national governments are actually now getting the opportunity in that, and they will be pressed hard to use them, and they will be stricted to use them in areas such as ICT and such as research and innovation programs, and also helping their small businesses, because part of this whole new program coming up is that we really want to, help the small businesses have access to funding, integrate with the research base, and start harnessing science sort of economically. So the structural funds are back, and we can expect to see them channeled in, but some pressure from research institutions on governments to do that would be good, or direct communication between research institutions and the Commission in order to collaboratively work out how to get that would be good. Now, there's a new fund that's just been set up, and that's some 800 million euros on a program called Spreading Excellence and Widening Participation. And this one is directly targeted to those regions that aren't participating in a lot of projects. So this includes having a lot of provision, a lot of money to seed capacity, to set up new centers of excellence, and to try and twin research teams across East and West, to set up exchanges, to enhance mobility, to enhance networking, all that kind of stuff. There are European research area chairs. There's a big fund for appointing people who look to be, young, dynamic, innovative in some of the poorer regions in order to propel them into positions of leadership. So look out for that one. And also they're setting up centers of policy advice for the governments. I don't know if it's also for research institutions, but essentially a lot of thinking has gone into the Commission's vision for research and innovation Europe-wide, and they're pretty keen to actually engage with people and share those ideas and share those solutions and work collaboratively. And they've got another program as well, which is called Smart Specialization. And that means that region by region, they're hoping to help all of Europe identify what are its research and industry strengths and play to those strengths so that they can keep some of the best minds in those particular areas and attract more people in those particular areas so they can actually be specialized world leaders in particular key areas. Also, what I was saying before about the slashing of administrative costs and time to grant and things like that, that's going to hugely help smaller businesses and smaller research institutes and non-English speaking research institutes, right? Because the bureaucracy burden before was huge, and that's kind of helpful relatively for the big powerhouses around Europe, because they've got the kind of administrative capacity that can just shovel this through. For smaller teams that come new to Commission funding, it was just too much, and a lot of people just turned away at the beginning and said, I'm not dealing with this. So the fact that they're slashing all of that really does lower the barrier to entry. So we're all looking forward to seeing that, I think. And in terms of salaries, I have been told that there is working its way through the financial, shall we say, frameworks now, an opportunity for €8,000 bonuses on salaries. this is something of a hangover from FP7. I've been told, it's a trick in the setup. But there is an opportunity for researchers to claim, 8,000 euros extra per annum. And this was put forward by some of the poorer regions, and then it was decided it wasn't just for them, because you have to have equality, and so then it's available to all countries, but it might be the case that in places like London they don't actually use it because that would be too disruptive to their equal work for equal pay within university mechanisms. But that's at least something. But still, there are some of us who are looking to overturn the basic laws about reimbursement because, as far as I'm concerned, it may help, but it's kind of like a plaster where an operation is needed. You do actually need to free up Eastern Europe and other southern countries within Europe to actually be freely competitive and to be able to get equal pay for equal work, no matter where you live. So I'm quite insistent on that one. Right, what have we got next? Okay, so in terms of that 800 million fund, you can actually see it in their plans here. So spreading excellence and widening participation. And that's 1% of their budget plan. Now, is 1% fair for all of the poor regions? Well, actually, it's not money given to the science. It's actually, I think, a pretty good deal because it is a key to unlock the 70 billion funding on the research programs and the 300 and whatever it's going to be this time round billion of structural funds. So this 1% is really what lots of people in Eastern Europe and other countries that are now struggling, like Spain, Portugal, and Greece. This is a really important fund to target because 800 million is a lot. I mean, if you think about your average international project is going to be about what, a 2 million fund. This is like 400 of those projects, all of them targeted at reorganization, networking, twinning, just anything you can do to appoint research leaders, to make all the cultural changes, to give all the policy advice you need in order to really start being competitive on the science funds and open up all that money that's sitting there on the structural funds. So this is a really key contribution, and I think that the Commission should be doing their part in terms of the salary issue, but I also think it's very important across Eastern Europe and other parts, like I said before, to do their part and realize that, wow, maybe we should get in touch with the Commission and start saying, how can you help us out, restructure, because they're offering services for free here, and very valuable services. And like Finland and Korea, we saw before, restructuring to boost your research and development capacity can really turn things around for you. So there's actually a big opportunity here, and I think people should jump on it. So, right, we're pretty much at the end now. I just want to go through what I said before, the levels of what people can do now in terms of this is a moment of opportunity when we realize that there has been a lot of brain drain, and looking forward, science and innovation and research are so important to a country's future. The Commission seems to start to waking up to this now. So there are certain things that we should be pushing them on and taking them up on in order to really get some excitement and dynamism around this to start turning it around. So this salary issue is to my mind, a critical one to fix. And there's myself and others in a growing number that are actually looking to push this hard and target this and make it happen, and make quite a bit of fuss about it. And there are various windows of opportunity for when you can change things, and we're looking at all of those. Now, the Commission should also be engaging with lots of different levels of people in Eastern Europe and in some of the southern parts, in order to maximize its plans. So not just the government, even though it should be pushing on these governments hard, but also the research institutions themselves, developing, packages, strategy packages with them, and then going back to the governments to get this approved. But also, I've talked to people in the Commission who are very keen to hear from grassroots groups, people that come together and represent young science and new innovative ideas, and actually talk to them instead of talking to the politicians all the time. They would actually like to know what's going on the ground. It's good for them, and it's good for all of us if we can get their ear on these issues. And that would really change the feel of the dynamic here. I think it's important to help import some of the Western systems that we know are successful into Eastern Europe, and it looks like they've got policies to do that, and that's good. They should also try and help bring some actual Westerners in, instead of just trying to say, invite some of your best people back to set up research teams. Why not headhunt some of the best talent around the world in certain areas and plant them in and help them set up teams? I mean, I know when I did my PhD, which was on behavior genetics, my supervisor was an American guy that had actually been headhunted from America to London in order to bring in his school of thinking about how our PhD program should be organized. And that was really successful and fun, and had its own energy about it. And I highly recommend that way of thinking. Also, I've got to say, going back to London, just the international teams there are great. There's so many languages spoken in all the offices and corridors around me. So when you do have that international environment, it really is a good melting pot of ideas. And I think instead of just talking about retention of talent or bringing your nationals back, I think the Commission should really actively be talking about how to headhunt, implant people from other areas to seed these centers of excellence. And support for the young researchers that have just started coming through the system to win the money and influence the policy. And finally, and this is what I said before, stop branding Eastern Europe as, laggard, and how do we help them catch up, and, what a problem they are. And actually, see that you've got the talent here, and see that you think you know how to, organize systems, put the two together. It is massive potential. No one talks about China being laggards. I mean, if you look at their research and innovation statistics, they're pretty woeful, actually, if compared to their population size. But no one talks about China in that way. They talk about, China's coming along, it's got a lot of potential. Well, Eastern Europe has got a ton of potential because it's got a lot of things fixed that China still has a long way to go to fix. So let's talk about Eastern Europe's potential here, because that is the reality. Now, on the action level of governments, well, they haven't been doing that much so far. So they're going to need to be pressured, because they respond to people. They respond to the Commission because they respect the authority, and they respond to pressure from people. So let's make sure we get together and provide both. Commission and grassroots groups and institutes should be pairing up to put pressure on governments to do the things that governments need to do. I've put it top, invest in reorganization, not hardware. That's almost like, that's a note that where the money needs to go is in individuals, and it is in restructuring organizations and career pathways. It's not in buying fancy labs that are then going to sit around and be admired. Okay, and there are some people that are quite keen to do that. those people should be avoided, okay? It's all about restructuring the systems to be competitive and let the good people who want to do good for others come through. And I agree that government should help pick flagship areas where they think their country can start leading, and they should be doing the kind of branding that the European Commission has been doing for, you know, itself and Europe as a whole. What areas of science do we want to be excellent in? What's going to be, you know, our badge of pride? Have a think about it, pick it. The Commission is offering policy advice, and we should make sure that ourselves as individual scientists band together, form groups, and start being loud about what we think are productive areas. And also, the Commission has made this big pot of money available for integrating all of these small businesses into their new program. Now, small businesses in most countries don't know this. So where do they go when they're starting up and looking for funds? They usually by default go to their governments. So let's make sure that all these governments are aware of these funds and are communicating that to all the small businesses starting up. Let's make sure that they've got good websites that communicate that, because if these small businesses are starting to pull in the funds, a lot of that is going to be in collaboration with research institutes. So let's start networking and pairing up and get the money through into Eastern Europe that way too, via small businesses as well as via the research institutes. What can the institutes do? Network. First of all, they should be networking with their small businesses, and they should be networking with Western institutes, because and they should be doing this at conferences, and they should be pestering governments and the Commission for money to send their people to conferences, because when you know what's going on in your field and all the other operators, when they decide that they want to put in a project proposal and they know that they like your thinking, they're going to call you up and say, we don't have any Eastern Europe representation. Do you want to be on this? And that's oftentimes how it works. But the institutes here need to be aware that sponsoring networking of themselves with others in Western Europe and with businesses at all levels is really, really productive to getting the money in. They need to make sure that they've got clear, clean, good, strong career pathways, so that if they do have good talent they've started to train up, that they can keep it, and that they can attract other people in and say, look, you know, here's how it goes. You come in at this level, but then after postdoc, you know, we've got our lecturers, and then we've got our professors. You know, this is the kind of support and training we offer them along the way. You know, so if you're at this institute, then you've got a good future with lots of good training opportunities as well. Remove bureaucracy, open up transparency, and importantly, always in terms of people, look for those people who don't seize opportunity for themselves, but rather want opportunity for themselves and others. And there's a big, big difference. But if you get the latter into positions of power, then that's really good for everyone. So opportunity makers and not opportunity hoggers. You look out for those people. And like I said, more linking and putting value on getting money in, putting papers out, and don't do it just by politics and, you know, you've been here a long time and slap on the back, because much as it's nice to support friends, you also have to always be thinking about making a better research environment for the whole institute and for the whole country. Well, I mean, that goes everywhere, but now, individuals, so if you don't represent an institution and you're not a commission policy maker and you're not part of the government, what can you do? Well, I mean, what we're doing here today, I think, is really important. If you've got a research team, just make sure that you get to conferences yourself. Make sure you publish what you can. Get to conferences yourself, and get all your PhD students and postdocs or whatever also to conferences. It's all about knowing people, knowing what's going on, and then that's how you get to be part of a lot of these international research projects. And once you've been involved with one or two, people know who you are, people will call you up again when they're applying for other ones, or you can start up one of your own, and then you know who else you want to involve. Because basically, if you're going to build an international team, who are you going to build it with? You've got to know who's out there, and you've got to know who's got skills out there. That's how you get the international money, by knowing other people and being able to put together the teams. And for all the PhD students and postdocs, just make sure that you yourself network, you write academic papers, write blogs, write on social media, but just start getting to know people and getting involved in policy. And to finish with a quote, we want our best researchers to have that, extraordinary and exciting luck, right? No matter where they are in Europe, you want that opportunity for luck. Well, the Roman philosopher Seneca the Younger said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So let's make sure that on the level of the individual, the research team, the institute, the government, and the commission, we prepare the ground really well for that luck to come along and people to pick up top jobs, work hard, get out the good papers, put together excellent teams, and do well by their institution, their country, and Europe as a whole. And make that pan-European vision of really strong innovation that benefits us all and comes back to economy, health, and all of that. And that's it. So thank you very much, guys. Thanks for your patience for this marathon session on all of these issues. And I'd like to say special thanks to Kosovia Life Sciences. Their logo is bridging the gap, isn't it? And really, in terms of East and West, they absolutely do. This what I said this morning at the press conference, and I want to say it again, and that is that when Peter first called me up to say, your paper is absolutely brilliant and it's going to be really helpful for our thinking, I said, okay, well, here's some more links, I've written more on it. And then he got back to me and said, great, can we have you for a talk? And I said, okay. I didn't think much would come of it. But then immediately they got back to me again, and Norbert got back and they said, okay, what date suits you? We can organize the flights, accommodation, just tell us when, we'll put it together. And then I thought, okay, these guys are serious. And they're fast, and they're efficient, and they know what they want to do. So I said, okay, let's do this. And they went about arranging it, and since then we've exchanged so much information in terms of what we've come across. And it's absolutely clear that they do understand the mentality and the opportunities here in the East and how things operate, but also in Western Europe, and can see how to put the two together. So I think they're very new, but I really do think they've got a great future in helping make that link, and I hope we all do well by it. Thank you.